I see shame and then again guilt as the enemy of humanity, because what happens is I become less human. I'm not really connected to me anymore. And the other thing is, I don't believe I'm good because shame is a liar. Shame lies and it says, you're all bad. It doesn't say, you know what, Mary? You made a mistake. You're human. Humans make loads of mistakes. And what humans do best is we learn from our mistakes.
I'm excited to introduce to you my next guest, Bronwyn Schweigerdt. She has something very interesting to offer us as menopausal women on a topic that we don't discuss nearly enough. In this episode, we will dive into the importance of understanding and channeling anger, especially those emotions that we experience during menopause. And Bronwyn will emphasize that anger actually gives us vital information and should be acknowledged, not suppressed. She will explain healthy ways to express anger, such as setting boundaries and being assertive. And she also distinguishes assertiveness from aggressiveness. And more so, Bronwyn explains that our unprocessed anger can actually lead to anxiety and panic attacks and even manifest as physical illnesses. Stuck energy, that lack of ease, well, that leads to dis-ease. So this makes sense. But what I like about Bronwyn is that she takes a different approach, encouraging us to change our relationship with anger and view it as helpful signals rather than something that is entirely negative. What's really interesting that we get into, and this is very common amongst menopausal women, and that is adverse childhood experiences, things that happened to us when we were younger, that stuck trauma. And a lot of that comes out as shame and guilt, particularly from those experiences when we were younger. We were never taught how to or allowed to release those emotions. Bronwyn, though, advocates for self-approval and nurturing oneself, even that inner child, especially for menopausal women, and this can serve as a pathway to healing. We also touch on societal attitudes towards menopause and the difference between anger and hatred. Very key. Bronwyn's own journey of becoming an anger expert is quite fascinating. But before we begin, here's something you need to know about Bronwyn. She is a licensed psychotherapist and anger expert and the host of the podcast, Angry at the Right Things. She's passionate about helping people come back to life by reconnecting with their inner child and transforming their relationship with anger. So rather than trying to fix people's messes, well, Bronwyn takes the approach that is refreshingly honest. She invites her clients and listeners to feel the emotions they're most ashamed of, including hatred and rage. She believes that feelings don't just disappear, not until we find the courage to express them with someone who truly listens and validates our experiences. Bronwyn describes her role as playing a midwife to these difficult emotions, helping people finally externalize and release what's been buried for too long. And her work has led to remarkable breakthroughs with clients breaking free from depression and anxiety and even bipolar disorder and psychosis, all by healing the relationship with anger and ultimately with themselves. So if you're at all curious about the power of embracing your full emotional self and want to learn more, stick around. This conversation just might change the way you think about anger forever. Hello, Bronwyn Schweigerdt, joining me from Sacramento, California. So happy to have you on the Menopause Disruptor podcast. I think this message about processing anger and hatred is so apropos for the menopause journey when we can be faced with a lot of those emotions. And I liked in particular what you had said on one of your YouTube videos, that often the suppressed anger in ourselves largely comes from PTSD. And a lot of my episodes have been dealing with PTSD, as well as other neurodivergent traits and concussion. So there's a lot of emotion going on, and we're going to unpack that. But first, thank you so much for joining me here today.
You are very welcome, Mary. Yeah, so I think you are referencing, I read a really interesting research study where they found that suppressed anger at ourselves was most correlated to the most severe PTSD symptoms in their participants. So, yes, I agree with that. I mean, that has definitely been my finding that we humans suppress or disassociate from all kinds of feelings, but particularly our anger at others and at ourselves, as well as our hatred of others and ourselves. And it does make us sick in one way or another. And that is not a surprise to me that people with PTSD were the most likely, with the highest severity of PTSD, were the most who are holding in anger at themselves and not, allowing themselves to process it, to acknowledge it, to feel that. And so
Mhm.
that has been like something for me recently. I'm really trying to hone in on my podcast, especially is letting people know, what researchers call, they have a word called alexithymia, which is a fancy schmancy word for saying keeping it all inside. What my clients as a therapist call holding it inside. That's what alexithymia is. It's just a word for what we humans do, which is hold things inside. And so research shows that alexithymia, us holding it inside, literally makes us sick. And there is so much to substantiate now autoimmune disorders in women, in children, in men, of all types. So one of the studies I saw, it was multiple sclerosis in women was most correlated with alexithymia or keeping it all inside. Type 1 diabetes in young children was most associated with children who are alexithymic, meaning they keep their feelings inside. So, again, as a therapist, as a podcaster, I am trying to get this message out. We're not doing anyone any favors when we keep things inside because it is making us sick.
Absolutely. My goodness. We really need to be hearing this message over and over again. Before we get into that quite deeply, we always tend to arrive at a place in our career and our expertise from past lived experience, our journey. I would really like to get into your backstory, Bronwyn. What landed you in this field of psychotherapy and to become an anger expert?
Yes. So I landed here as a second career. I did not want to change careers. I already had a master's degree. I didn't want to go back to school, but as life, gives us these great crises slash opportunities, I had mine, and I found myself in a very, very severe depressive episode about 15, 16 years ago, where I thought I was losing my mind. And everyone I knew was like, go to a therapist, find a therapist. And I went looking for a good therapist. And each time I remember sitting on the couch thinking to myself, you know what, Bronwyn, you are barely functional right now, but I still believe you would make a better therapist than this person. And that was my experience with kind of everyone I went to, unfortunately. So part of that healing journey for me with that depressive episode was going back to school and becoming the therapist that I needed for myself. So getting another master's degree, getting all those 3,000 hours, all of that. But looking back in retrospect now, that depressive episode, and then that was followed by a subsequent, even more pernicious depressive episode a few years later, I see how both of those depressive episodes were absolutely the outcome of my own disassociated anger. And I started kind of connecting the dots with my own clients. And I don't have as many clients with depression. Most of my clients have a lot of anxiety though. And I started seeing, oh my God, their panic attacks happen right when something goes wrong and they're refusing to allow themselves to feel angry because they don't feel entitled to feel angry. And so they get anxious, they get panic or even manic at times. And even, I have one client who had psychosis. So I just started
Mm.
seeing, oh, pretty much all of these mental illnesses are an outcome of our own disassociated anger.
Oh my goodness. So, step one, I would think obviously is being aware, identifying it, and understanding, like you had, understanding this has got the best of me. I can't live this way. I have to move forward. Such a big step. So, in
Mhm.
your work as a psychotherapist, working with other people who are trying to unpack their anger, what should be the first step to move forward? And I will say this, as someone who suffers PTSD,
Mhm.
anger was probably the number one indication to my family that, hey, mom or my wife,
she's not quite all together there. But there was a time and a place where I wasn't willing to listen to that because I thought, well, that's how my parents were. I grew up. Isn't
Mm,
that normal? So,
mm,
how do we lead someone, and the
mhm.
menopausal woman too, who could be going through this anger as associated with the hormone changes, among other things? How do we bring them through that first step of awareness?
Yes. So I would start, I think the first step is changing our relationship to anger, changing our
Mm,
disposition toward anger. So I like to say that I like to see anger as akin to a light on the emotional dashboard of our car saying, hey, check under the hood. Something is wrong. And the goal is for you to find out what it is and to bring it to repair. And if we can start to see that as anger instead of maybe how we were taught growing up, it's
mhm,
bad to be angry. You don't have the right to be angry. Or if you're angry, I'm out of here. So like the abandonment that we often associate when we are true to ourselves, when we stand up for ourselves, when we can like deconstruct all that and just go, oh, this anger is here for my benefit. It is here to give me wisdom and instruction on what to do next. So if we can start to view it as that barometer, that warning light on the dashboard, instead of something negative or bad. Of course, anger can result in something negative. Yes. And we all associate anger with that kind of sensational, violence or verbal violence that we've seen or witnessed or been the victim of. But anger in itself is not inherently bad. It is good. It is there to give us vital information. So if we can just say, okay, I'm just going to feel in my body, oh, I think I'm feeling angry right now. That's okay to feel. Where do I feel it? I feel it right here in my chest. Okay, I'm just going to start with going, thank you, anger. Thank you for giving me this information. And I'm going to check in with you about how to move forward right now. And then that would be step number two. What does this anger in my chest want to say or do? Does it want to have a boundary with this person? Okay, let's think about how we can have a boundary. Does it want to speak assertively and say, hey, Mary, what's the deal? We were scheduled to meet at noon and it's, noon 15 right now. And this is not the first time this has happened. What's going on? So those are just examples of
yeah.
me harnessing that anger and channeling it out of my body in healthy ways. And that's the new kind of perspective we need to have is that's what anger really wants to do. It wants to be moved and move us in a healthy way.
So, what are some of those healthy ways that we should be moving?
Yeah. So like I just said, like a boundary or assertiveness, those are two
Okay.
main ones. And again, the example I gave of like, hey Mary, what's going on? It's 12:15. We said we'd meet at 12. That is me channeling my anger out. Does that mean you hear the anger? No, you probably don't. You probably just hear me going, "Hey, what's up?" Right? But that is actually my
Mm,
anger that is compelling me to say that. It's confrontation, but it's not like confrontation. It's hey,
right.
is everything okay? Right? So it's a kind, curious, compassionate type of confrontation or, accountability maybe, but it's also motivated. It's catalyzed by my anger and that's me being true to myself and maybe you're going to say, oh man, I just got in a car accident. Oh my God. And then I'm not angry anymore, right? That takes care of that. Then I'm going to go, oh, shoot, what can I do? Should we reschedule? But what if you're like, I'm not late. What are you talking about? We said we'd meet at 12:15. Well, then my anger's, I'm going to reinforce it. I'm going to say, no, that's not true. And so that's just me being assertive, but I'm not being aggressive. Okay. And so a lot of times we conflate
Yes.
assertiveness with aggressiveness. There's nothing aggressive about me just saying, "Hey, that's actually not true."
I would say this is a perfect time to break for a word from our sponsors. Guess what? You, my listeners, are my sponsors. That's right. I would love it if you could support the show. Helping me will help bring these amazing episodes to you each and every week, just packed full of information to help you on your menopause journey. And to support the show, all you have to do is go into the show notes and click just above where you read Meet Your Host. In green is Support the Show. You click on the button and it'll bring you to a page where you have the option to donate monthly, 3, 5, 8, 10. You can be a loyal supporter for as long as you want with recurring fee as little as $3 a month and opt out at any time. Each investment goes directly back into producing episodes with even better content, improved audio quality, and will go a long way in bringing great guests onto the show.
Right. So when we ourselves are the subject of our anger,
Mm.
how do we then turn those key steps, of course, first meeting it with gratitude and then getting curious. But then how do we say, I gotta put some boundary downs and be assertive with myself? And what is there some other specific techniques then for giving ourselves some grace, but at the same time holding ourselves accountable to that anger that's
Yeah.
bubbling up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we are all angry at ourselves at some level, if we're honest. And I call that regret. That's what I call regret. And if we are people who are reflective, we're going to have regret because we're human and we make mistakes. And, if humans do one thing well, it's making mistakes. So on my podcast, I actually have a short episode called a self forgiveness exercise. And so I lead my listeners in this exercise to forgive themselves. But this is basically what I do with my clients when I find out that they have regret, which, again, all of us do. So basically, what I do is I have that person kind of talk to themselves. So that I have them close their eyes and see maybe younger Mary from 10 years ago. So I would
Okay.
have you close your eyes, picture Mary from 10 years ago when you're thinking about the thing that happened that you regret, right?
Okay.
And then I would lead you and I'd have you talk to younger Mary and say, you know what, younger Mary, I want to hate you right now. I really do. Like I am really really feel betrayed by you, by what you did or didn't do. And I would be really honest and like describe everything and share all those feelings. And then after that phase, I'd pause and I'd say,
Hmm.
but you know what, younger Mary, you know what? I'm also able to take into account, because I know you pretty well, I'm also able to take into account the fact that you were conditioned from early childhood to believe that you are responsible for other people's feelings and you're not allowed to
Mm.
say no. And I'm able to take into account that you were conditioned to betray yourself and believe that you need to do what other people want you to do and not be true to yourself and all of those things. And so when I take in the whole context, younger Mary, even though I am angry at that thing that happened, when I take in the whole picture, I can forgive you because I see the whole picture and I see that you were just blind. You were just blind,
Yeah.
right? And so when we do that, we can finally really forgive ourselves.
And so I would imagine this is in line with a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and the talk therapy in regards to, particularly when you're suffering from PTSD. And there is a lot of blame and shame. And the layers get confused from our childhood rearing to being triggered in a situation, particularly if it's an occupational stress injury, that we are suddenly back into that mindset where those hidden beliefs or those patterns, behavioral patterns, developed because we were mirroring, reflecting what our parents were telling us. And then as we get older as adults, I would imagine then that a lot of the work that is being done to help with the PTSD is centered around that kind awareness and to unpack that negative self talk. Let's look into that a little bit
Yeah,
more. Yeah.
yeah. I think. I'm not a fan of CBT, but I do believe
Okay.
that we do need to uproot those distortions. There definitely are those cognitive distortions, but instead of me, the therapist, doing that for you or trying to convince you, you need to do that for yourself. And so that's why I lead listeners in an exercise where they're giving that to themselves. You have to be the
Gotcha.
one who sees that for you, not me, right?
Right. Okay. Okay, so take us through a session, say, whether you're working with your listeners out there with your podcast, or if it's, say, you're working with a client one-on-one. What would be an exercise, for example, that you would take someone through this process and then leaving them in that space to be okay with whatever comes up so that they can, I guess, get the full benefit of the process of the therapy session, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I start with, we need to know that our feelings aren't right or wrong or good or bad. And we really
Mhm.
need to stop judging our feelings. And we need to stop being afraid of our feelings, that they're going to overwhelm us. And
Yeah.
honestly, what heals feelings is sharing them, whether, they're people are sharing them with me as their therapist, but also me sharing them with little Bronwyn, So when I go back and I have a painful memory that I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole because it was painful, I have to be there for little Bronwyn at age 10 who experienced that and say, you know what? I'm going to feel it with you now because what's shareable is bearable. And when we share our feelings, they're no longer overwhelming. The reason why childhood, especially feelings, emotions were so painful is because we had to feel them in isolation. But
Mhm.
if we had, a loving attachment figure there who felt them with us, who didn't judge us, who didn't shame us, then they would have been bearable. And now, as adults, we really need to do that for our inner child.
Inner child. Oh, so good, Bronwyn. This is where I see the link now. We were told to, forced to feel these emotions in isolation.
Mm.
And let's face it, like our frontal lobe is not fully developed until our 20s. And here you're sending a young 4, 5, 6 year old to the room, berating
Mm.
them for their behavior. They don't understand. It's just this uprising of emotion that they need to release, and it manifests obviously in
Yeah.
behavior that is unbecoming or unacceptable to the parent. Or, of course, you add in the parent stressors, and it just pushes them over the edge. I think back to my childhood. But when we were told to feel these emotions in isolation, naturally, we all figured out our own coping mechanism, our own strategy to survive that pain, that anger. And that's
Mm.
what gets stored deep within our system. That neural pathway is developed.
Mm.
Then we hit menopause, and estrogen leaves the body. Everything that was nicely hidden underneath that veil is gone. And we are confronted with all of these stored emotions, physical, mental, emotional scars, wounds, issues that have to
Mhm.
be dealt with. Do you work with menopausal women? And in particular, is there strategies? And anger being anger for everyone is pretty universal, but are there specific strategies to help women in particular face those demons? Because we are at a higher rate of depression statistically,
Yeah.
a higher rate of autoimmune disease. And I like that you brought that up.
Yeah.
So, what should we be focusing on in particular?
Well, if you can't tell already, I'm very unconventional in how I see all of this. So I will
Right.
say, my first career was in nutrition. I already had a master's in nutrition, and I was all about, self-care, obviously, lifestyle, health, all of that. I wouldn't have believed back then what I believe now. Like even a few years
Okay.
ago, I wouldn't have been a believer to now where I stand. And how I now see things is I really believe that our bodies are always speaking to us. They're always attempting to communicate with us. And I believe our body is actually where our inner child lives. Our brain, our prefrontal lobe, as you mentioned, is our adult self who is dissociative oftentimes from the body. And we're like, I don't hear anything. I'm doing just fine. I'm gonna think about this. And we're dissociating from our body. We're dissociating from our inner child. And I believe menopause symptoms is our inner child trying to wake us up, which is why insomnia is so common during menopause. I believe it's our inner child trying to wake us up literally and say, stop betraying me and start nurturing me. You've spent all these years nurturing your other children, and now they're grown or grownish. It's time to nurture me. That is absolutely how I view menopause these days. And what I have found is that when my female clients who are menopausal age
Hmm.
start doing that, when they actually just start nurturing themselves, their symptoms go away. And I myself found that to be the case as well. And when I say nurturing ourselves, I don't mean, self care as we usually think about self care, because self care could be like go for a walk, have a cup of tea, do some meditation, do some yoga, whatever. Those are great. But when I say self nurture, for a lot of us, it means ending relationships that are toxic in our lives. It means big stuff that
Yeah.
we don't normally associate with self care. It means standing up for ourselves with bullies in our lives. It means drawing boundaries, being assertive. It means that is self nurture, really being true to ourselves. And I am convinced if women start to finally wake up and self nurture in real ways, we're not going to have these menopausal symptoms.
That is such, I would say, an enlightening, refreshing, well informed way of phrasing it, Bronwyn, looking at it conceptually. I love that you use that analogy, that inner child trying to wake us up. And now I'm going to equate it to something that, and my listeners are going to say, oh my God, there she goes again. Ayurvedic philosophy does say
Mhm.
that menopause is the time of the great reveal, but it's
Mm.
also the time of stepping into our wisdom. Yes, being the wise matriarch, that wise, empathetic woman of great wisdom from her lived experience. And what do you picture when you think of a woman with that persona is this wise, nurturing, grandmotherly type. And I really feel that it's that embracing empathy, embodying that empathetic role we should play, but it makes sense. It starts with the self. Healing
Mhm.
starts within. And
Yeah.
interesting, though, you said dealing with the big stuff. Oftentimes we will see women will end those relationships, marriages, divorces will
Yes.
happen,
Yeah. Mhm.
or they'll reshape their relationship with their children because their children, if they have children, are now adults and moving on in their lives. And it's a matter of saying, I gotta stop parenting and just be a parent now.
Mhm.
And then moving on. And then the boundaries. Women will leave the workforce altogether
Mm.
because they're saying, I'm done. I'm not playing with this anymore. I'm not doing this. I'm not selling myself short. I'm not playing small. So it really comes down to having them, I guess, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but embodying this role of
Mm.
playing big instead of
Mhm.
small in life, taking up space.
Mm.
Yeah, so good. Bronwyn, that is a real light bulb moment for me, I would say. I really appreciate how you phrased that. So what other practices then, of course, that you would lead clients and you want your listeners to do, the conventional ones or what we picture for self-care, like the yoga and the meditation, complementary perhaps, but what are some of the other deep rooted exercises that you allow your clients to go through to unearth these big
Yeah.
big things?
Yeah, well, going back to what you said before, how, as kids, we were sent to our rooms to feel our
Yeah.
feelings in isolation. Well, we didn't feel them. We stopped feeling them in isolation because humans don't
Yeah.
feel painful feelings in isolation. We do the coping mechanisms, which aren't really coping. They're just kind of dissociating mechanisms. But yeah, so going back to that, what happens when we experience that as a kid, when we're sent to our rooms, when we are made to isolate for having, anger or any kind of negativity, it creates a lot of shame. So we really, throughout our lives, especially in our early childhood, all have all of us have shame for different reasons in different
Yeah.
parenting methods for different ways. Some were outright abusive and some were just normal human stupidity that all of us make mistakes as parents and our parents made mistakes and those mistakes went unaddressed and so we carry shame because I see shame as kind of the residue of all neglect, all experiences of rejection, or any kind of emotional abandonment. So, shame's kind of the sticky, common residue that we get from that. And shame also is it is so pathological because what it does is it severs our connection to ourself. So, it severs me from little Bronwyn, my inner child because I have found working with, I work a lot with the body as a therapist, what we call somatic, that shame lives in the gut. Like almost all my clients will say when they're talking about their shame that they feel it in their gut. Guilt also seems to live in the gut too, and I'm not sure they're always different, shame and guilt. I think we kind of make artificial distinctions that may not apply a lot of the time. But anyway, those things live in the gut. And what I also have found is that our inner child lives in the gut too, which is why when we listen to our intuition, we're really working with our inner child. We're really being true to ourselves when we trust our gut. But when there's shame there or when there's guilt there, that connection is destroyed, or not destroyed, I should say, severed. And now I'm not trusting myself. I'm not listening to myself. I'm not listening to my gut. I'm not doing right by myself. I'm betraying myself because that's what shame and guilt do is they disassociate me from me, which is the worst thing ever. So I see shame and then again guilt as the enemy of humanity because what happens is I become less human. I'm not really connected to me anymore. And the other thing is I don't believe I'm good because shame is a liar. Shame lies and it says, you're all bad. It doesn't say, you know what, Mary? You made a mistake. You're human. Humans make loads of mistakes. And what humans do best is we learn from our mistakes. Shame doesn't say that. Shame's a liar and it says, oh, you made that mistake. You're all bad. Right. And so that shame tells us that we are bad and we need to believe at some level that we're good. And so now, because that shame is keeping me from believing in my own goodness internally, I need to outsource that goodness from outside of me. So I'm going to need to find it in my looks, in my physical appearance, in my sexuality, my ability to attract men, or I'm going to need to find that goodness from my professors, from my boss, from my career. But it's addictive. Like I'm never going to get enough. I'm never going to be sated, right? Because it's coming from outside of me but I'm addicted too. And I'm now betraying myself to do whatever it takes to win this person's approval of me. So it's more and more now severing me from myself. I'm not being true to myself and I'm trying to get something that needs to come from within. And so what I do, getting back to your question on my podcast, is I lead my listeners through what I call an integration exercise where they integrate with their inner child and we dislodge the shame. And so I'll give you an example. So for me personally, when I was 10 years old until I went off to college at age 17, my father would mock me at dinner every night. He would just mock me and ridicule me every night. And one day I just put all this, I just closed my eyes. I just imagined putting all the shame that I felt from all those dinners in a big cardboard box. And I returned it to my dad and I said, "Here you go, Dad. This is yours. It always was. It was never mine. I'm going to return to owner. You do with it what you will, but it wasn't my shame. It's your shame. Here you go." And voila. And so I lead my listeners through this where we do that for ourselves, for our inner child, where we give the shame or the guilt back to the parent.
Right. So powerful, Bronwyn. Very powerful. Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And the power that we have within ourselves to visualize, and the brain doesn't know the difference between it being a physical, tangible item or just it visualized, thought of in the mind. It's still getting the same results.
Yes.
And I would imagine that whole process that there has to be an element of gratitude held for ourselves, or that kind awareness held in check the whole time through it. Because as we're going into it, I can just imagine, oh yeah, and I remember that time and that comment, that there could be this, and correct me if I'm wrong, a percolating sensation of, oh, that one hurts a lot. But then if we want to get truly through the process, we have to keep going back to, I see it, I'm naming it, but I'm still giving myself that kindness, that room to feel into the curiosity, as you said, to feel what's coming up and not absorb it, own it. So,
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt as much when we realize I'm not the shameful one in this memory. It's not
yeah,
me. I'm not the shameful one. You're the shameful
mhm,
one, mom or dad. It's your shame.
yeah. Just switching gears a little bit, but on the same note, we've talked about how a lot of it comes up from in our relationships presently, work relationships, intimate relationships, and of course, childhood relationships or childhood rearing. To what extent does societal attitudes towards menopause play into the role of a woman's anger, that she is
Mm.
not, she's suppressing it rather than addressing it? Do you feel?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think societal, just the kind of the common theme of, feeling objectified, that because I'm a woman, I
Mm,
have to look a certain way. And, if we look at that from that lens, I
mhm.
have younger female clients who really want to look good. And I'll say, what happens when you get to my age and you have to work so hard if you're ever gonna, it's a lot of money to try to continue to look good. And you know what? There's really no real way to go about it. You know, what really needs to happen is you need to feel good about you. You need to have your own approval. Let's start that right now. Let's not wait till you're my age and you're getting the wrinkles and the gray hair that you've decided are not approved by in your mind. Let's give ourselves that approval right now. Let's give
Yeah,
ourselves the approval that we need for once and for all. And then we can feel free to disappoint the hell out of everyone else.
I love that. Yeah. Going back to us being the center, that the healing comes from within, and that external stimuli, well, it's impermeable. It's not going to last. And people will come and go in our lives as well as jobs, but the steady constant that remains unchanged is us. But what we can change is our relationship with the pain, or with, well, the pain of course, but the anger, the emotions
Mhm.
that percolate up. On your very recent episode, you talked about how hatred can actually be good for us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And and you did mention that, and you touched on that, with anger being sort of that little barometer, if you will, to tell us that something needs to be done. is there a difference between having anger, but then just real deep hatred? And so we'll look at that first, and then how is that hatred good for us?
Yeah, so that's what I talked about. I try to clarify and distinguish hatred from anger because we kind of wrap them all up together, and we really need to distinguish. So, yeah, anger, when we're angry with someone, we still have expectation on them. And I see that as, if that is someone in our lives that we want to be with, that can be a good thing where we confront them and say, "Hey, I expect you to do better. This is how you need to do better. Let's talk about this." But hatred is really not like that at all. Hatred is kind of like getting to a place where you don't feel anything. You just don't feel anything. It's like apathy. It's like unconcern. It's an absolute absence of feeling. It's not hot like anger. Anger is a hot emotion. Hatred is cold. Hatred is like, I don't care. And that can be so beneficial because, I talked about this on the podcast when we are walking down the street with a young child and we see roadkill and the young child says, icky. And you don't talk them out of it. You don't say icky. That's bad. No, you say, yeah, dead things are icky. That warns us to stay away. When we feel ick, we naturally want to stay away. So keep that up, little girl. Like that's a good thing. That's a good
Mhm.
instinct. And when we feel hatred for someone, that's an ick. That's a disgust. And that's telling us stay away. And we need to heed that. We need to see that as vital wisdom. And I really see hatred as giving us a type of closure with this person. Whereas anger, we're still like expecting something of them. Hatred, we're just kind of like done. And that's how it's worked for me in my life. When I felt hatred, I know I'm done with this relationship. It's over. And that's given me like absolute peace. And then what I say about that is once I've cut that person off, I don't feel hatred because I put it to use and it went to work and there's no more hatred.
Wow, yeah. Now, what if that hatred is turned inward? We spoke
Well,
about
that would
anger
be
being
shame. So
that
that's
goes back
shame.
to the shame.
That is shame. Yes.
Yes.
Shame is self contempt. So we need to
Yeah.
go back to that root of where that shame got lodged. So that memory or memories, most of us have far more than one, and we need to do those integration exercises. We need to go back and see our younger selves and say, let's put that shame in a box and give it back to this person. So, if that was
Mhm.
sexual abuse, go there and see it in your mind's eye and put all that shame in the box and say, here you go. This is all yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so don't shy away from that because it is so powerful. We're basically doing what we should have done in that moment if we had the ability to do.
Yeah. So I don't often get to this point in my podcast, but I do like to talk about an influential book that we've come across, and you did share one. And I imagine because of what this book is, or the topic it's on, it has influenced and shaped how you approach your work, or just maybe how you approach yourself in your own journey. So share with our listeners what
Mhm.
your book is and why you would recommend it as a good read in our journey through understanding shame, hatred, anger, and as well
Yeah.
as menopause.
Well, I just love the book Untamed by
Mm.
Glennon Doyle, which I read a few years ago. I think what I loved the most was the very first chapter in the book where, she's giving you how she arrived at the title Untamed, and she's in a zoo with her kids. And there is, let's see if I remember this right, there's a cheetah that they're having kind of jump through hoops and do all these tricks. And they're showing everyone how the cheetah was raised with, I think, a golden retriever. And so the cheetah from its infancy. And so the cheetah kind of thinks it's a golden retriever. And so it was tamed. It was a tamed animal. And Glennon Doyle kind of has this epiphany while she's watching all this. And she's looking at the big, beautiful, slick muscles in that cheetah's body, and she's seen the cheetah turn tricks like a dog, sit and, stand and all this, and she's like, "No, you're a goddamn cheetah! Be a cheetah!" It is so cool, like, and it just kind of spoke to me, that her own
Mm.
experience, like, she realized, "I've been tricked into thinking I'm a golden retriever and I'm a cheetah." She kind of, for her, the light went on. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And something maybe we can all relate to is that we have been conditioned to be something domesticated that we actually are not. And it's time to really embody ourselves and grow into what we were created to be.
That is so beautiful, Bronwyn, and it truly does bring it back full circle to recognizing our own inner wisdom, stepping into that, embracing, embodying. I just love that. It makes so much sense. And we're going to share that book in the show notes as well. Let our listeners know where you are, where they can find you, how they can find your podcast,
Angry at the right
Angry
thing.
at the Right Things.
Yeah. So listeners are welcome to reach out to me. I'm on a lot of social media with my name, which is hard to spell, but my podcast is Angry at the Right Things. And I also have videos of it on YouTube as well.
And little shorts too. So they're great little pieces of sage advice, little exercises. So we'll definitely share that in the show notes. Bronwyn, this has been a really necessary conversation, and I'm glad that I found you at a time when I did because of the
Mhm.
process, me personally going through my anger and the PTSD diagnosis, and
Mhm.
also looking at my head injury, my concussion from a different lens as well,
Mhm.
and embracing, embodying some of the outcomes from that. But it's been through the journey of working with menopausal women and diving deep into coaching women, the
Mhm.
menopause education, that I've come to realize that we are all shelving an emotion of some sort. A lot of it, yes, guilt and shame and anger. And we've come from a generation where we were left to our own devices to cope.
Yeah.
They're surfacing. And menopause, as you said, when they come up, what a beautiful invitation for us to recognize it, or that inner child saying, wake up, let's get to work. Just love
Yeah.
that. Bridging the overlap between menopause and those emotions and anger has is very enlightening and necessary. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
women will find that their symptom management and just their journey and stepping
Mhm.
into this new role to be that much more graceful and fulfilling when they can grapple with this concept and get to work that integration exercises as you speak of. I'm really excited to share your work, and I'm so thrilled that you reached out and found me, and I can share your work as well too. It's a nice compliment to each other. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your expertise, your education, your lived experience, sharing your
Yeah.
stories on the Menopause Disruptor
Yes.
podcast.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me.
If today's insights resonated with you, I'd love for you to be a part of our growing community of menopause disruptors. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening right now. And if you know someone who can benefit from these conversations, please share this episode. Sometimes a simple act of sharing can be the first step in someone's healing journey. And hey, if you're ready to take the next step in your menopause journey, I'm here to support you. You can find all my services, including my comprehensive menopause intelligence digital course, one-on-one coaching programs, and workplace education services at mlcoaching.com. It's in the show notes. Want to stay connected and get regular doses of menopause wisdom? Follow me on Instagram at Menopause Disruptor Podcast, where I share tips, insights, and real conversations about navigating this transformative phase of life. Let's continue to disrupt this menopause conversation together. Remember, midlife should be the best life, and it will be. Namaste.